Ah, okay. So I will. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, you did yourself. Okay. So the second guest tonight, I'm going to try and bring on right now, and let's see how this works. Okay. Um, Doug, do you want to speak just so I can see if we can hear you? No, no, no. Well, we can hear you. Okay, so we can hear you.
Can you
Okay.
hear me
Don't
now?
maybe. Yeah, you don't need to maybe have a heart attack. Uh, right. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, excellent. So, Dr. Doug Graham, for people that don't know on this webinar, so to introduce Dr. Doug Graham, someone that's really seen by many people as the father of the modern raw vegan movement. Uh, he wrote a book called 8 to 10 10 Diet, although for many years before that he was lecturing and providing information about this lifestyle that kind of contradicted what were the norms at the time. And he helped to, with his book, with his information, popularize this idea of a fruit-based raw vegan diet rather than a diet that was more based on fat, on gourmet raw recipes and things like that. And many of his students have went on to pretty amazing things and have shared this information to millions of people around the world. And he's one of the few people I can think of in the raw vegan movement actually has students that have lasted on a raw vegan diet long term and been able to pass it on to many other people. Some of those students include Robbie Barbaro recently, whose book, I believe, Mastering Diabetes is a bestseller and New York Times bestseller or something. Fully Raw Christina, probably one of the biggest well-known names in the raw vegan world. But Doug has also been a coach for many years to athletes, and he's brought this idea of a raw vegan diet to many athletes around the world as well. So, but also someone that I love to talk to because just a bottomless pit of information on the science of human health, on what we call hygiene, the science of human health, and obviously the raw vegan diet is a big part of that. So thank you for joining us today, Doug. Is there anything else you want to add in introduction to yourself?
Oh gosh, no, I'm just honored to be here. I've been listening to the whole last hour, and you've been very thorough, Dr. Ocampo. I appreciate the voice of calm that you brought and a lot of the information. And no, I've been talking about Corona more than just about anything else for the last 5 weeks now. It's kind of boring, but I'm becoming increasingly aware of the difference between people who are concerned and the medically educated people who are concerned. The gap shows up far greater when we're talking about things like a microbe or a germ or a bacteria or a virus than it does when we're just saying sunlight or fresh air and exercise and positive mental attitude. It's tougher to grasp the deep science if you have no science training. So it's interesting to see the different opinions as they're developing.
So what's been your reaction to this whole situation? How's your thought process kind of went and responded to this?
Okay. I have so much. It's in two things, right? Like in one way, I don't want to talk about it at all because it's not worth talking about. It's a flu. But in another way, it's the biggest thing going on in the whole wide world. And the things we are doing, the steps we are taking in order to try to stop the flu are going to be, I think, far worse, or have already been and are going to continue to be far worse than the actual coronavirus itself. The numbers don't support the reactions. So is it a fast moving thing? Are people dying? Do I feel badly over every death? those are all yes answers. Does it kill a very specific portion of the population? Absolutely yes. In that way, it's truly, it's pretty much no different than any other flu, but it is unique. We've known about coronaviruses for more than 70 years. There's corona as a part of almost every other flu we've ever studied. Ever since we've been studying flu, we know that corona typically makes up, a portion of every kind of winter illness that comes around, certainly the flus. And this one is its own, flu, if you will, it mutates every year. It changes a little bit each time it comes around, hence they all have different names. And even the same one changes a little bit every year. So it's very hard for me to get excited about the flu. It's much more easy to get excited about the social media. This is a social media driven situation. It's almost 100% social media driven. And if we didn't have an internet, nobody would have noticed this flu. The numbers are so small, and compared to other years' flu, I mean, the total world death rate from coronavirus hasn't even yet reached what is typically the death rate of the United States alone. We typically lose 500,000 people a year to flu in the world. And in the world, I mean, we just don't have, 1% of that. We haven't even reached 1% of the typical annual flu death rate. That's,
so take us to some of the other numbers you're talking about in terms of you saying that it doesn't really
have a lot of numbers. Some of them are in my head. Some of them I've even written down. But I mean, if we look at in a typical year, 1/10 of 1%, so 0.01% of the people will die of flu, and about 1%, 1/10 of 1%, 10 times as many, 1/10 of 1% will be affected by flu. So, it's a small number. In this flu, once again, we see there are portions of the population that are just plain unaffected. I mean, children under 10, I don't know, there may have been some cases of coronavirus in children under 10, but it's statistically, it's zero. It's just not happening. We're having like 80% of the people who are seriously affected, 80% of the people that are seriously affected are over the age of 70, and almost half are over the age of 80. Sometimes we look at a hurricane and say, oh, how horrible the hurricane, so much destruction. But if we look at what happens in nature from a hurricane, the ocean bottoms are cleaned out. Any branches on trees that are weak get broken off. It creates a phenomenal new growth, a resurgence of growth, a resurgence of life. I am not a callous person. I'm a very feeling person. But the non-productive portions of our society, the people who are constantly in and out of hospital, the people who have chronic, degenerative, debilitating, pathogenic conditions that are very soon going to take them down. The fact that they caught the flu because their vitality levels were so depleted after 50, 60, 70, 80, even 90 years of, as you called it, they're not following the science of human health. They're not living hygienically. They're not taking self-constructive behavior to its ultimate levels. These people eventually break down. There really should be a huge distinction between people who die of coronavirus and people who die with coronavirus. As we're seeing, the numbers support some 97, 98%, possibly even higher of all the people who have died from corona had 2 or 3 or more other complications, of respiratory illness, of heart disease, of cancer. These are people of obesity, of diabetes, or all of the above. And then they get the flu and they die. Well, I feel terrible that they die. And nobody, I feel terrible anybody dies, but dying is part of living, and that's just how it is. And we have to live with that reality. If this was a serious problem, like bubonic plague, 50% of the people who get bubonic plague and don't get treatment die. If this was septicemic plague, 100% of the people who get septicemic plague die if they go untreated. And if this was something like that, we would go, oh my gosh, it's a plague, but this is a flu, and
right.
it's affected about 1% of the typical flu worldwide. I mean, the number of people who typically get flu is somewhere in the 5 to 50 million range. It's a huge gap depending on the specific flu, but it's like 5 to 50 million. And we're just not even seeing anything approaching those numbers. Granted, it's still growing. In some places it's still growing, but in some places it's already peaked out. And that's a fantastically good sign that it's gonna peak out. It's just not, I don't know why.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you seen anything like this in your lifetime?
Sure. The flu of 2014 was really bad. The flu of 2014 killed almost twice as many people as typical flu does. That was a bad year for flu. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we've seen some other really bad flus come along in the last, I'm 67. So we've seen some other really bad flus come and go in those times. I wasn't around for the pandemic of 1918. That was a really bad flu. That was probably the worst flu we've ever had. But that was 100 years ago, before my time. But back then there was no social media, so nobody knew about it. And back then there was no air transportation, so it took a much longer time to spread.
Yeah.
But the thing people aren't catching, I think, even though a lot of people, as we say, like we throw numbers out and people don't really get the numbers, okay, or they're not listening to the numbers. But the thing they don't get is that the little things, the bacteria, the virus, all those little life things that are going on around us, they're everywhere. They're so everywhere that it's astonishing. And to hide in your house isn't really necessarily making it better in any way. We're not talking about a plague, certainly not a septicemia plague, where isolating yourself would be a really good idea. Isolating yourself in this case, the microbes are there already anyway. You were exposed 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago. You don't know who's coming in contact with whom. You don't know who's handling the thing. You don't know who's handling your mail. I mean, we're still accepting mail and nobody's sanitizing the mail. We're passing things around constantly. We're touching things constantly that, so they only let 3 people into the store at a time. But what if one of those people, unknown to themselves, had exposure to corona already and now is passing it around, and they walked down your aisle 2 hours ago and touched something? I don't think that the techniques we're using is particularly effective, but they are spreading a lot of fear. I mean, I agree with Dr. Ocampo. I'm not spreading conspiracies. If 5G was the cause, then we'd see it everywhere. That I understand, like 5G is an additional factor that lowers our vitality. I'm not arguing that 5G is not good for people. But there's places that are having very bad outbreaks that don't have 5G, and there's places that have 5G, that are not having really bad outbreaks. We can't just draw that line. We can't just say that this is going to be mandatory vaccine is what's going to come out of this, because SARS came around a long time ago and we still don't have a vaccine. Vaccines take a very long time. I think this will be over and done and long since forgotten before ever a vaccine is instigated. You know, is it population control? Is it actually some kind of a chemical warfare that's been spread upon? No, it's not anything like that. This is just the flu. It's not even. It's not a world attempt to create electronic money and get rid of paper currency. There's a whole bunch of conspiracies. I don't believe really any of those.
So I mean, it seems like the World Health Organization, other people that have got involved, seem to be putting out there this is a much worse situation than usual. And why do you think that? Why do you think that's caught more attention? Or
I think CYA is really a powerful influence in the world. You know, if we were to, we'll clean it up. It's called cover your butt. And so everybody's got to cover their butt, and they have to say, well, just in case this and just in case that. And hence all the airlines made their statements about all the wonderful things they're doing now to clean up the air and disinfect the planes, things that they probably should have been doing all along. But now they're doing it at least, so that's a good thing. Do we know that we can blame the wet markets? We have a pretty strong indications that we can blame those Chinese wet markets because there have been several respiratory flus that have come out of those wet markets. Specifically, the Chinese government has closed those wet markets on several occasions and then reopened them once the pressure was off, because financially, those are really good for the Chinese people. It doesn't matter that they're really bad for the animals. So I would go at it this way. I would go like, show me that one vegan has died yet of coronavirus. Because I can't find anything anywhere that says even one vegan has died of coronavirus. Now, I'm not saying vegan is the cure, because it's not, although vegan is going to be forced on a lot of people as a result of coronavirus, and we don't really care why vegan is brought out to the more popularity, but the only thing I'm seeing that is makes any sense is a matter of vitality. And the more vital you are, the more you build your health. We come back to the basics: fresh air, mental attitude, getting sufficient, important to health. These are the things that keep us from, okay, I talk a lot about cooked food because one of the big factors in cooked food are called mutagens. Now, mutagens exist in other areas. Mutagens exist in our environment as well. And a mutagen is something that doesn't allow your normal healthy cells from reproducing themselves perfectly. This is why we have the least number of mutagens in children, and our mutagen levels and the amount of mutagenic effects that happen add on. They accumulate as we get older. This is why we're not seeing corona in super young people. Their vitality level is so high, their mutagenic level is so low. But could we have a young person who isn't particularly healthy, who has a really horrible lifestyle, been very terribly self-destructive, or their parents didn't know what to do, or I'm not going to place blame here, there, or anywhere, but are there some very sick young people? Sure, there's hospitals for young people, but overall, we're not seeing SARS, we're not seeing corona, we're not seeing flu kill young people because they just get a cold and they recover. But if the same person's at 80 or 90 or 100 and they've been beaten down and they've got diabetes, obesity, and they've got, emphysema, well, the chances of this flu or any flu you know, being the last straw. But we can't say, you could put 10,000 straws on a camel's back. You can't blame the last straw.
Well, let me ask you a question. Because the other thing that comes up, and I think it's something that you've got some interesting thoughts on, the immune system and the idea that we can boost our immune system, that we can do something for it. Can you? I know you've got some thoughts on the immune system in general. Could you maybe go through some of that information?
Okay. Systems of the body are listed according to anatomy. So we have 10 systems in the body according to most of the, depends whether you want to call it genitourinary or if you want to call it cardiorespiratory, if you want to break each of those into their own, but they're anatomical systems. There's a skeletal system and a nervous system, and we have our various systems. And the parts of one cannot, according to anatomy, be parts of another. So the skeletal system is the skeletal system, and the muscular system is the muscular system, and that's just the way it is. But in the world of physiology and physiologists, they also want to have systems. I mean, they want to say this is a physiological system. The way this works is a system of itself. And eventually, in the very early 1980s, physiologists started talking about what they referred to as an immune system. And the immune system takes structures, anatomical structures, and looks at their function. That's what physiology is all about. It's about function, not structure. So in a physiologic system, we're looking at structures, anatomical structures from many different parts of the body, and saying that these structures work together in some way to protect us, to alert us, to help us repel, avoid, or deal with various outside influences that would be negative to our health. And they call this an immune system. Now, we understand immune means that you're not responsible for your actions. You don't have to pay the price. You don't have to pay the cost of what you just did. So you could have diplomatic immunity, get pulled over by the cops for speeding, and they say, I have diplomatic immunity. You can't give me a speeding ticket. And that would be nice to have health immunity. We could stick our hand in boiling water and not get burned, or we could eat some tomato paste that already has this, that, or the next disease in it because the can got damaged, and we wouldn't get sick. But in fact, we can't be immune regarding our health. There are factors that help us stay well. And so the immune system is a physiologic system, not an anatomic system. In the world of anatomy, there is no immunity, there is no immune system. But in the world of physiology, there is. I don't know if that helps or if that makes it even more confusing, but the thing about the immune system that bothers me is that everything in our entire being is part of our immune system in terms of, I mean, I've got hair on my arm. If a bug lands on my arm, I know about it, and if it was a mosquito, I can brush it away. If I hear noise that sounds obnoxious to me, I can move away from it. If I'm around a person and I don't like their vibes, I can sense it and move away. That would technically, to me, I mean, my skin protects me from all sorts of things. I've gotten dirty many times in my life, and my skin protected me from getting septicemia. And then I could wash it off later on. So therefore, my skin is part of my immune system. My hair is part of my immune system. All my senses. I mean, when I see danger, I move away. So therefore, my sense of sight is part of my. In effect, we're one giant immune structure, but we're not immune from illness. It's just the name of the system.
Sure. So it's uh, it's kind of a confusing thing, I guess.
Okay, so
But
it leads into vitality. What they're really saying is the higher level of our vitality, the less ill we're going to be. That's how we tie it
right.
together. The more we build our vitality, the less illness we're going to experience.
So how do we build our vitality, basically?
Say that again?
How do we go about building our vitality?
We
What are the
build our
basic steps?
vitality. Vitality is easy. We accumulate vitality. It's why I called my very first audio series "The Cause of Health." Right? We accumulate vitality in two ways. One, by participating in all of the things that are known to be health constructive for us: sufficient sunlight, not getting burned. So it's moderation in all things that are good for us. The appropriate foods, sufficient rest, sufficient time in social situations where we can talk with others, because we are social beings, and sunlight, fresh air, exercise, all of these things in moderation, and as close as we can come to total abstinence or avoidance of anything that is considered a self-destructive influence. So irritants and stimulants that will harm us in some way, debilitating excess or deficiency of the things that we need to have. If you don't get enough sunlight, if you're completely sedentary. So we build our, it is inborn within us, it is inherent within the human body to seek to thrive. Every cell seeks to thrive. And all we have to do in order to make that happen is the same thing that a gardener does to make pretty flowers or to make healthy plants, or what a farmer might do if he's trying to raise a prize cow or a prize hog. What we do is we supply the conditions that humans need in order to thrive, and we will thrive. And we know this because we tell our children who say, "Hey, can I have a cup of coffee like you, Dad?" And we go, "No, you're 6, it'll stunt your growth." We know this. No, you can't have alcohol because it's going to be bad for you to do that, or you can't have whatever it is. We know the things that humans need in order to thrive, and this is how we accumulate our vitality. One, by participating in the things that build vitality, and two, by not participating in the things that make our vitality dissipate.
And for you personally, are there any changes that you would be making to your lifestyle based on this kind of situation, or someone who felt they were at risk? Is there any change at all that you would make?
Well, I think Dr. Ocampo covered it well as well. Changes? No, I wouldn't change a darn thing. Especially isn't nature so kind to us to make winter, flu season, also the citrus season? I mean, how nice is that? I would want to, Linus Pauling back in the early 50s won a Nobel Prize for telling us that we need to get between 10 to 100 times as much vitamin C as what most people consume. And everybody laughed at him because there's no way to get that much vitamin C unless you happen to eat fruits and vegetables as your diet. So I'm consuming as much vitamin C as Linus Pauling recommended. He won a Nobel Prize for his work with vitamin C. I don't think he was stupid. And so consuming lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, getting enough sleep, I count my blessings. I've never been one to participate in social media, but I sure wouldn't want to this is a storm of social media, and spending any time on coronavirus is time wasted. You should be spending your time building your health, eating fruits and vegetables, eating foods that are in congruence with our anatomy and physiology. So we are plant eaters. And that's the end of it. Anything else is going to destroy our health, and especially if we cook it, it's going to destroy our health even worse. This would be a great time to avoid cooked food. I'd want to be getting outside. And even though it's only the end of March, I'd be getting outside at midday. If you're someplace cold, get outside in the middle of the day when the sun is at its peak and go stand on the south side of the building where you can catch the full sun and even some reflection, and at least get some fresh air. I'd be leaving windows open as much of the time as possible. The fresh air outdoors is always better quality than the dirty air that's indoors. So open your windows and let some air in. Move around a bit and get some light on your eyes and get some light on your skin. These are the big things. But as far as my lifestyle, I mean, I'm living in a very rural area. I'm eating fresh fruits and vegetables. I'm being a little more active than my usual life, because I don't have the duties of family upon me at this very moment. I'm in Costa Rica. Razi and Francesca are in England. I'm just finishing up a retreat that I've been running here for the last month. So I really nothing. No, I wouldn't change anything, because nobody is showing me or suggesting anything that would be an increase in overall health. No.
If I was to say to you, okay, Doug, there's a room here full of people with corona, they definitely have coronavirus. Would you have any issue with going in there and talking to them or whatever, or would you avoid like that?
Well,
you know, like what?
I practiced chiropractic for 20 years, and I got to tell you, in that time, you know, as a chiropractor, I go face to face with people with a distance of just a couple of inches. For some of the maneuvers that I have to do. I have hands-on every single person. And in 20 years, I don't know how many thousands of people came into my office that were suffering from the flu. During that period of time, I never once caught the flu. Certainly today, I'm a little bit older than then. But still, the chances of me catching corona are so low as to be negligible. I would have no qualms about going into a room full of people with virus. But, you know, fortunately, I don't have to do that, but I have no qualms. The doctors are doing it every day, all day. The nurses are doing it every day, all day. We're not seeing an outbreak of coronavirus amongst medical staff.
Mm-hmm.
This should tell us something profoundly important, that the medical people are even willing to continue working. They didn't go on strike and say, "Hey, we're not touching these people. These are untouchables. Just line them up and shoot them." Nothing like that going on. In fact, that basically there's a bottleneck when it comes to ventilators. There's a bottleneck at the hospital because most hospitals carry very few ventilators. They don't have that much cause for it. And right now, ventilators are in short supply. They're in high demand and short supply. And so this is creating a problem. But other than that, I mean, the rumors of thousands of trucks full of millions of bodies, it's just not real. It's just the hype spreads, and then the hype spreads. I mean, when this first came out, back in February, I was saying, look, this is the emperor's clothing all over again. This is just the flu. Let's not get excited. And yes, people die. And yes, you know, there's 500,000 flu deaths every year around the world. On an average, on a bad year, there could be 1 million. But on an average, there's 500,000 flu deaths, and we haven't gotten, what do we have? 50,000 deaths. We're just nowhere near 500,000 flu deaths.
But at the same time, I think someone mentioned the comment that there's been much more actions being taken than there would have been for a usual flu situation. So,
but the action hasn't proved to be particularly effective. In Holland, there's been no action taken at all, and they have a lower incident rate and a lower death rate than all the countries around them that have taken such massive action. In Nicaragua, they're having a big outbreak, and in the adjoining countries on each side, they're having tiny outbreak. So it's not because of the action. That's what I'm trying to get across, is that we're talking about a virus. As Dr. Ocampo mentioned, it's so small that we have to use special units even to measure it, units that human beings can't even understand because it's so small, it's so out of scale. We have to have an electron microscope to even see the darn thing. And so these microbes are everywhere. And it doesn't mean we need to freak out that there's microbes everywhere like Howard Hughes did. I mean, we have to keep it in perspective, but the microbes are everywhere. We've already all been exposed. It's just we have enough vitality. And again, it was an interesting thing to say, well, gee, maybe that flu that I had in December really was coronavirus. It was a bad cough. It was a really bad cough, but I worked right through it. And people might say to themselves, maybe I've actually already, it's everywhere. It's just that it's not affecting most people. We're talking about 80% of the people who have coronavirus don't even know it. And I'm not saying it's not a serious business. If you're in the high risk group, then it might be time to start thinking about changing your diet, to start eating more healthily. It might be time to go out and take a walk every day. It might be a good idea to take better care of yourself. But if you're not in a high risk group, you're just not at risk.
So here's an interesting point. We're talking about this with Dr. Ocampo as well. She was saying she doesn't think it's a good idea for people to do something like change, for example, to do something like a fast at this time or something like that. Right. What would be your opinion? Obviously, I know that you're quite supportive of fasting as an idea, but do you think people should be doing that right now?
Interesting.
In response for this reason, I mean, because of this situation.
Okay, I've been supervising fast for 40 years. I've seen nothing other than spectacular results in terms of raising vitality. All facets, all features of anatomy and physiology vector towards health. When we fast, we raise our overall vitality levels as a result of having fasted. But it is a little bit of a pardon our dust situation. During the fast, your body's doing a whole lot of work, none of which makes you less healthy. I do disagree with Dr. Ocampo on this particular situation, but she's not a fasting professional, but she's an exceptionally talented medical professional. But as a fasting professional, I have a bit of a challenge because no, I would not recommend that people fast on their own. I simply can't. People are far sicker today than allows them to handle a typical fast on their own, because if something goes wrong, A, the medical profession doesn't know how to deal with you after you're 10 or 12 or 15 days into a fast, and B, you don't know yourself what to do if it turns out to be anything other than a completely uneventful fast. Now, many fasts are uneventful. And so in theory, yes, fasting will raise your vitality. Fasting will help you rejuvenate yourself and work your way back to health. It's why in the natural scheme of things, anytime you don't feel well, you tend to lose your appetite. You tend to lose any desire to eat. You almost have to force yourself to drink fluids even. And it's nature's plan for us to fast when we're ill. So in one hand, I'd say yes, fasting is a smart option. But on the other, I don't recommend non-supervised fasts of more than just a day or two, because far too many things can go wrong. I will be offering subsequent fasts down here in Costa Rica over the coming years. And hopefully people will come and raise their vitality before there's an emergency. a health emergency. But as we know, if it wasn't for the last minute, most things in the world wouldn't get done at all. Life really depends on the last minute. Human beings like to put things off till the last possible minute. So they quit smoking after they get emphysema, or whatever it is. I don't think fasting is an undue stress on the body. I think fasting is a relief to the body. When I take people through fast, they all say how easy it is to fast. Fasting is one of the easiest things you'll ever do. But knowing how to do it properly, supplying the right conditions for a fast, recovery from a fast, these are all things that take a bit of experience and talent. It's an art and a science. It's not just a theoretical, hey, stop eating. It's not just that.
Let me ask you a question though, because I think that some of the people that have fasted on their own, for example, for 21 days, for 30 days, for 40 days on their own, without someone giving them information, guidance, knowledge, all that stuff. Let me ask you this. I think that people don't realize how long it takes to recover from something like that. Would you say that there is a recovery, or maybe I'm wrong about that, what's your opinion, but do you not think that some people, maybe they come out of a fast, obviously a lot of people have lost fitness or strength, and that takes a while to come back, and for some people that's maybe a bit of an adjustment they weren't expecting, maybe? Is that a problem with some people?
I would say three things we can count on happening during a fast. One is that you're going to require some influence in order to change the way you do things afterwards. So for instance, when I supervise a fast, I spend 3 to 4 hours per day with each guest doing an educational program for them. So in the course of a typical fast that I supervise, I'm spending about 100 hours with each person, explaining to them how to build their health after the fast, how to live afterwards so that they can take home something different than they brought to me. But number two is that the amount of challenge in fasting's pretty easy. You just lay there and wait. But the breaking of the fast is so challenging, and it depends on the person. But typically I would want to break a fast for as long as I fasted, or twice as long as I fasted. There's going to be a long process. A person fasts 40 days is very likely going to require 80 or 90 days before they say, oh yeah, I'm really back up to full speed. But this is dependent, three, on the vitality of the individual, which we could say the age of the individual. As we've discussed earlier, vitality is beaten down by the cumulative effect of negative health participation. So I'll typically say a person who's 50 is going to take longer to recover than a person who's 40, and a person who's 60 longer, a person in their 70s, 80s. Person in their 80s that goes through a 20-day fast could require 80 days to recover. A person who's 20 and goes through a 40-day fast might only need 30 days to recover. But to recover to the point of world-class athlete, like a person coming in as a world-class athlete, does a month of fasting and then wants to recover and resume at a higher level of performance than prior, could take 6 to 12 months or more, depending on the way they lived. So without the education and without actually performing the fast correctly, which is total rest, we're not going to tend to see good recovery, because during your fast, your body protects you from appetite. It protects you from hunger. There's various things that go on in our chemistry that actually deaden our sense of hunger during a fast. And so we're not feeling like we're doing without. We're almost apathetic towards eating. We're disinterested in eating while we fast. But when you start introducing food back in after a fast, at some point, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, at some point after the fast, you're going to become incredibly interested. You're going to become hungry in capital letters. You're going to really get ready to eat, especially as your activity levels start to rise back up again. And at that point, as we know, the hungrier you are, the less discerning you become. If you don't have somebody outside to help you, to share their experience, their advice, and guide you towards making appropriate food choices in appropriate quantities, invariably, it's not going to go well. And I've talked to thousands of people who fasted on their own, and they all say, like, yeah, the fast went okay, but the breaking of the fast was a disaster. And
Right.
there is no cookbook recipe, here's how it's done, because it's got to be done on a custom, individualized, one-on-one. This is one of the beauties of the practice of medicine. We learn things about, mass numbers and generalities, but when it comes down to practice, we treat an individual, we care for an individual, we guide individual people through individual situations. So you can't just say, hey, on day 7, do this, and on day 12, do this, because it could be completely wrong for that person.
Sure. Well, moving back to the situation, if anyone wants to ask some questions, we
Be
can
open.
we can go we can go a little bit longer with Doug. The next section will be myself, but I don't have a huge amount to talk about, so I can
It's the flu.
squeeze that down. But Roger's saying, I walk 8 to 10 miles every day in the Pennines where I'm surrounded by sheep, donkeys, horses. I'm waiting for the drones and police to put me back indoors. What can I tell them, Doug?
They're not going to put you back indoors. You're allowed to exercise once per day in England. You're doing just fine, Roger. You're allowed to go out once per day on your own or with a family member and go take your exercise. And no one has said how long that walk should be. My wife is going out for 3 and 4 and 5 hour walks every day with Francesca, and they're having a blast walking the dogs, walking the horses, walking whoever they can. I mean, it's a great time for dog walkers. They're doing well, but no, they shouldn't tell you anything. You can just say, "Hey, I'm out for a walk. I'm allowed to take a walk every day," and that's part of the rules. In England, now in Spain, you're not allowed to go, I think, 100 meters from your house or something. Gosh, I don't know what they're thinking, because as far as I understand, coronavirus, you're just as likely to spread it if you're 10 meters from your house as if you were 100 meters from your house. But that's how it's been. Yeah, I don't know. We've been on 20 walks today. Leave me alone. Very funny. How do I get that? Oh, glad you put that.
Yeah,
Theoretically,
that
you're
one.
only allowed out once, but how do they know if you've been out once already? I mean, you're allowed out. It's just, especially in the rural areas. I mean, I have an ultra runner who's a client of mine living in a city in Spain. I mean, she is locked into her house at this point and going stir crazy. But fortunately, she's got a little bit of machinery. She can slip and slide down her front steps or whatever. But she's not allowed to leave. And if she lived in a rural part of Spain, there's no enforcement at all. City density, the city density of the population is not conducive to great health.
Sure. Okay. Well, anyone got any last question? We want to try and keep the questions more towards the
Yeah,
coronavirus situation.
I'm
Hopefully,
happy to talk about
there's a
Corona,
lot.
but I'm not gonna participate in the hype. We should all be scared. I'm respectful of the fact that it's a strong flu and it affects your lungs, and I like to breathe as much as the next person. I've been in situations where I couldn't breathe, and it's very scary. You don't have long to go if you can't breathe, and so when it hits hard, if you're 85 years old and you've been a smoker all your life, coronavirus may be the death knell, and and I feel for those people. But if you're 16 or 12 or you're a parent and you've got children, I wouldn't be worrying about your children because they're not going to get coronavirus. It just doesn't attack those people. And even if it did, they wouldn't know it because 80% of the people that get corona are so healthy that they either just think it's a flu or they are completely asymptomatic. Let's realize also that something we didn't mention, which has to do with the testing for corona itself. Testing has to go through rigorous testing. In order to come up with a test for something, it has to be rigorously tested. But in this particular case, because corona came up so much, this particular strain of corona that we're calling COVID-19, this particular strain of corona came up so quickly out of the blue that the very first test that ever came about for corona is the one that we're using, and it was put through zero testing. So a couple of days ago, China sold 150,000 test kits to some country in Europe, who then put the test kits through a test. They tested it with water. They tested it with various things that were not corona, and they got an 80% positive rate. This 80% positive rate has already been announced several times around the world because other people had already seen this. 80% false positive, meaning that everybody who gets tested for corona has it according to the test. But the only people they're testing are people who are so ill that of course they have corona anyway. So the problem with this particular test is not only the 80% false positive rate, but that it is not a quantitative test. And as Dr. Ocampo mentioned, you could have one virus, a unit of one, and it's not going to bother you. You have to have, and again, our sense of understanding the numbers of things so small, but you have to have trillions of billions of them within your multiplying within your body in order for it to be a problem. At that point it is, but the test will test positive if you have one virus. And this particular test will test positive even if you have none, because it's an 80% false positive test. So relying on the test isn't really accurate in any way. This test should not be utilized at all because it's completely unreliable, except that it will test positive. But even if it did test positive and it was accurate, we have to differentiate between people dying with corona and people dying of corona. This is a completely different thing. Not even 1/10% of all the people dying with corona are dying of corona. 99.9% had multiple underlying complications from which they were dying. They have already been in and out of hospital many times.
Yeah, I mentioned this, give me a second. I mentioned this to my brother. Let me just see if I can find this. Yes, so I said to
I'm not trying to poo-poo the fact that there's coronavirus and people are dying. They are dying, but they're not dying as bad as if we looked at the overall flu situation in the world today. If we looked at the average in the world year after year after year, and there wasn't social media spreading fear. Most doctors would say this year was a bad flu, but not a bad flu season, because we don't have anywhere near the numbers of flu deaths that we typically get.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's two things that I kind of want to talk about. Maybe not go too long into it. The first, I brought this up with Aurelie because I think in the natural, whatever we want to call this movement, this kind of alternative to the conventional, some of the medical stuff or whatever. There's a lot of people who put across the idea that almost like these viruses aren't real, they're not really a problem, this isn't the issue, that it's not the germs, it's the terrain and all that kind of stuff. And I know that one of your friends slash mentors, TC Fry, there's a video where he talks about AIDS being a hoax and different stuff like that. And
he didn't say that AIDS was a hoax, even though he wrote the book The Great AIDS Hoax. He wasn't saying that AIDS was a hoax. What he was saying was the hoax was the social media, the way it was being purveyed, the people who were being blamed weren't the true causes of the situation that we call AIDS. We're not denying that AIDS exists in the fact that of a syndrome as an accumulation of symptoms, because AIDS isn't even a disease, it is a syndrome, and a syndrome means that you have multiple conditions that when you take them all together, you call them a syndrome. So AIDS is not even a disease, and the way it was being promoted as if there was a single cause for the 30 different conditions that fall under the net of AIDS, that was a hoax, because they said, oh, we're trying to find a cure for hoax, but by medical definition, or trying to find a cure for AIDS, but by medical definition, there is no cure for a syndrome, because the syndrome is made up of multiple different unrelated conditions. But when you see them all together, we call it a syndrome. He was saying that was a hoax.
Right, thanks for clearing that up. That's really good, because I wasn't really sure what that meant. And then vaccines. So potentially a vaccine might come out for this, and maybe some of your thoughts on that, or would you take the vaccine?
I'm really clear. I mean, I've studied vaccines now for 40 plus years. I had traumatic experiences with vaccines as a kid. I still carry the little mark on my arm, and remember not wanting to get shots. I mean, every child, fears a shot. Nope. I think every child, but maybe I haven't met every child. But most kids, don't want needles. And I think that's a pretty smart move. So in my own heart, in my own head, in my own experience, my own knowledge of having read, I've read probably about 12 feet of book. If we just stacked them from floor to ceiling, my library is about 12 feet high in anti-vaccination and pro-vaccination information. I am 100% anti-vaccination. I'm 100% anti-vaccination. I don't care vaccination for anything. I'm 100% anti-vaccine. But it doesn't mean that you can't get some mosquito-driven disease. If you go to a place where, Anopheles mosquitoes are spreading malaria, you may well get malaria. And if you take the malaria vaccination, you may get malaria from the vaccine. And it doesn't mean that you're protected from getting malaria from the Anopheles mosquito. So in my world, I'm 100%, I just take a stand. I'm against vaccinations. And even more so because of what they have to do to make a vaccine theoretically effective, which is to raise your immune responses by putting all sorts of irritants. The problem with vaccines isn't even so much the fact that they're giving you the disease in advance to protect you from getting the disease. And it isn't even the fact that they're putting eggshells and mercury and goodness knows what chemicals. You can get the list of all sorts of things that are so irritating and aggravating to the body that the body generates a heightened immune response, which it's supposed to do. That's what they want it to do. The problem is that within those animal structures especially, there are microbia, there are virus, there are various types of contaminations for which we have no method of excluding them. There are the things that, for instance, mad cow disease could easily be transported through a vaccine because we have no way to filter it out. And so the contaminants, and if you read up on the contaminants in vaccine, it's the contaminants that are in the animal product. So if they use egg white or egg shell or egg yolk or anything from an egg or anything from chicken feathers or anything from any animal, there's going to be fantastic amount of contaminant microbia that we can do nothing about, and it's going straight into the vaccine. And this is how, you know, I mean, we're blaming wet markets in China, but the vaccines become a fantastically strong vehicle for transporting disease.
Well, we've got some other good questions. If anyone wants to ask a question now, we'll take some more questions for Doug. Alex said, he's just heard that a big grocery chain here is closing for 10 days. In the name of staying raw and having access to fruits and veggies, what would you stock up on if you couldn't get a reliable source? He was saying, he was thinking frozen bananas. He said slugs, which is a name that you use for dried bananas, dates, anything else. What other 811 items are storable, he said? Banana slugs.
You can freeze a fair amount of fruits and vegetables, and having some frozen fruits and vegetables in your freezer at this point is probably not a bad idea. I like frozen bananas, so I've got a case of frozen bananas put aside, and it'll get me through a week, but it's not going to get me through a month. You'd have to have a heck of a big freezer to get through if you get a big old chest freezer, if you can still buy such a thing as a chest freezer, this wouldn't be a bad time to freeze a lot of bananas. But I don't know. I honestly don't know, because we don't know what's coming. But a few days, I mean, you know, anybody who's doing 80-10-10 in a way that they intend to succeed probably has a couple weeks worth of food in their house. And hopefully, if we stop access to fruits and vegetables, if that actually stops, we're going to be in very deep trouble, because if the farmers can't sell their produce, they're going to stop growing it, and it's going to create a cycle that can't. It could be very, very bad very quickly. What would I do? I would have a lot of frozen fruit on hand. I'm not a huge fan of drying fruit, but if you want to dry a bit of fruit to get you through the worst of the worst, that's better than not having it available. You can store dates. I mean, we've got 10 kilos of dates in the house at Ruzzy's. You know, we got 10 kilos of dates sitting there waiting just in case we just really need dates. But at the end of the day, if we're looking for the next best thing, it's still going to be steam and vegetables. As I mentioned early on, as far as I can find, and I've searched high and wide, I've asked a lot of people. I haven't yet heard of the first instance of a vegan with coronavirus. Certainly not a vegan dying from coronavirus. Haven't heard of that, but it could happen, because there's plenty of sick vegans who smoked for 50 years and happen to have other underlying conditions. So, I mean, if somebody just went vegan yesterday, it doesn't mean they can't get coronavirus today. Our options are freezing and drying. I mean, if you have a freeze dryer, then you could maybe do freeze drying as well. But our options are freezing and drying, and it's a good idea to have some backup plans. I mean, even in the regular world, we always keep backup plans in case the bananas you buy this week aren't ripe enough to ripen on the normal schedule. So, but fortunately, bananas provide a huge window, and having a couple of cases of bananas on hand is never a bad idea. If you end up with too many bananas, you can freeze them, you can dry some, you can have a big party at your house and invite some of your other people over, you know, your neighbors, and say, come on over and have some. We'll sit 6 feet apart from each other, but we can all have smoothies.
Yeah, we've got a couple more questions. So Luis, can you go into the relation between mutagenics and cooked food in a bit more detail?
Sure, that's easy. We know from studies that were done in the early 1900s that various chemical changes happen to food when we cook it. One of the first people to do this was Dr. Pottinger and his famous book, Pottinger's Cats. That was back in the 19-teens. In the 1920s, a French doctor by the name of Maillard did a bunch more studies on what happens when we partially combust various types of food. Partially combust means we didn't burn it like wood in a fireplace where it's down to just ash, but we just heat it up and let it start to go through its chemical changes that happen from the application of heat. If you live in California, the PCH is the Pacific Coast Highway, but in the science world, it's partially combusted hydrocarbons. So Dr. Maillard learned a bunch about partially combusted hydrocarbons. He studied that for a long time. And eventually that became a field of science which has to do with flavors. Because what we found out is that when we heat things, they emit flavors that we didn't notice before we heated them. These are from what are called unstable benzene rings, aromatic benzene rings. And when we heat those oils, they go through changes. We eventually learned that when we heat proteins, they also go through changes. Hence the TV commercial, this is your brain on drugs. When you drop or the kid's story about Humpty Dumpty, right? Once you fry an egg, you can't turn it back into a viable egg. Proteins change. If you've ever held hair over a candle, and we watch how the whole protein structure changes and the hair just curls up, and you can't straighten it back out again. These are changes to the bonds that they're referred to as cross-linked proteins. They're enzyme-resistant bonds form, so we can't digest the food that's been heated in that way, not the proteins from the food, proving our need for small amounts of protein. Well, as we learned more and more about this whole thing, what we found out in the 40s and then the 50s was that changes happen in the food that are called anti-vitamin, anti-mineral, eventually just the big umbrella of anti-nutrient. And so, for instance, if you heat various starches, there are anti-nutrients formed that increase our need for various minerals. If you heat fruits, changes are formed that not only is the vitamin C damaged, but there are structures formed that increase our need for vitamin C. So these are known as anti-nutrients. Then we started finally in the late 50s and then into the 60s, the whole study switched to what are known as gens, G-E-N-S, gens. And gens are the beginning of things or the origin of things. And so what we learned about were carcinogens. They were one of the first gens, all right? And we learned about carcinogens and that when we heat foods, we form carcinogens, which made the headlines in 2001 around the world when we started realizing that not only proteins and fats form carcinogens, but so do carbohydrates when we heat those. That was the, anyway. So then we started learning that if there's carcinogens, maybe there's other gens, and we found out that there's mutagens, the ones that stop our bodily cells from reproducing themselves perfectly. There's tremorogens, which as they accumulate in the body, they lead us towards having uncontrolled tremors that we don't know what caused them. It's not Parkinson's tremor, it's just a tremor. But it's coming from cooked food. It's an accumulation of consuming tremorogens. That there's tumorogens, these are substances that lead us, they create substances that are so toxic that the body has to surround them in a bubble that we call a tumor. And so we develop tumors as a result of consuming tumorogens. And of course, there are several other gens. The worst of them does not harm us specifically, but it harms our offspring. Things like thalidomide, when pregnant ladies took thalidomide, they felt fine afterwards, but their babies were born with no arms and no legs. just hands and feet sticking out of the stumps. So these are known as teratogens. And the teratogens might not affect your children. It might not affect their children. It could be 5, 6, 7 generations down the line before we even know about the teratogenic effect. But we know for a fact that all cooked food exerts a teratogenic influence. I've looked this up in many places online and found it 100% of the time there are teratogens in all cooked food. But the official opinion is that the level is so low that you shouldn't concern yourself with it. But heck, the American Indians were concerning themselves with the teratogenic effect of cooked food 200 years ago when they said, we're not going to make changes in our society until we consider the influence of these changes on the 7th generation from now. So, and this is, you know, the concept of that whole cleaning product people, the 7th generation, was based on an American Indian saying that, you know, we want to consider what is this going to do to the future generations. So teratogens, mutagens, carcinogens, tremogens, tumorigens, there's a bunch of other gens. Pretty much the genesis of all disease can be found in cooked food. It's not the only genesis of disease by any stretch, but cooking your food is a huge, huge issue. I really shun cooked food because I learned enough to understand. Somebody asked me recently if cooked food had no negative influences, would I eat it? And of course the answer is yes. If there were no negative influences, I'd eat it. It tastes good, and I wouldn't want to restrict my diet to some things that tasted good, just to eat other things that taste good. But for me, I have to consider the consequences. Razi was huge in helping me to learn that I need to understand the consequences of things, and not just the thing itself, or not just the immediate, you know, like they say, a moment on your lips, a lifetime on your hips. You got to consider the consequences of everything you do. And is this going to bring the best possible outcome? Is it going to take you closer to your goals or take you further from your goals? Are you moving in a self-constructive or self-destructive direction? So for me, I don't know if that helps with the gens. You have to go into some pretty deep chemistry to understand how they work. You know, why is a carcinogen? But basically, they are the source of all things disease.
Do you want to have a look at some of the questions? 'Cause I don't know if you can see the chat.
I probably could if I go look at the chat.
I can read some of them out.
Go ahead and screen. I'll keep my focus straight on what I'm listening to you.
Okay. So there's been a few people mentioning the connection with 5G. Do you have any thought on that? Is that concerning you at all?
I have a huge thoughts on this. Yes, I think 5G is an exceptionally negative influence towards health. There are some things that it does to various parts of our cellular structures called spin, and let's not worry about it. But there's some things that it does that make it really difficult for cellular structures to happen properly. 5G will be an accelerated aging process like nothing we have ever seen before, accelerated to the point of death, really. And I'm strongly against 5G, but 4G isn't harmless, but we can live with it. 5G I don't know that we can live with, and I'm going to use Marie Curie as an example. Okay, until Marie Curie started doing her experiments with X-ray. No one in the history of humanity had ever died from radiation poisoning. We didn't have the phrase. We were all capable of dying from radiation poisoning, but nobody had died from radiation poisoning because there wasn't any radiation to speak of other than that from the sun, which is definitely the same radiation. You get plenty of X-rays from the sun, but it's technically, theoretically, at least in an acceptable amount. As we said, all things good for you in moderation. So it wasn't a new disease. And AIDS wasn't a brand new condition, but after 20 years of experimenting with immunosuppressant disease, with immunosuppressant drugs, after 20 years of bringing immunosuppressant drugs to the people in order to promote the transplant of organs, because we couldn't do organ transplant without immunosuppressant drugs. Finally, people started showing immunosuppressant diseases. No, I'm not surprised at all. And so what we call AIDS as immunosuppressant syndrome of diseases, it wasn't that it was a new disease. It wasn't that we were incapable of showing AIDS before that time. We had just never been exposed to 20 years of immunosuppressants. And so, but after 20 and 30 years of being exposed to immunosuppressants, we showed a new set of symptoms. And then doctors found a new way of combining them to call it, you know, put it all into one category. In the same way, we get exposed to 5G. We're going to show, this is something people have never been exposed to. We're going to show a new set of symptoms. Does it complicate matters? Yes. Will it bring down people who are incredibly ill? Very likely. It'll be more than they can handle for a lot of people. We have to remember, again, that we're sicker as an overall population. We're sicker than we've ever been in history of humanity. Our vitality is lower. Our physical prowess is lower. We're not doing well in terms of the health overall. And oddly, and again, this might sound callous, but it's not meant that way. By the time Corona is done trimming off some of the dead branches of society and taking the non-productive portion and saying, oh, sorry, Grandpa, you gotta go. We will, as a people, be an overall healthier people. We will have developed our antibodies to Corona, but not to 5G. 5G is a terribly destructive influence. I heard a rumor today that 5G is going into all the closed schools in the United States while the schools are closed for coronavirus. I'm not sure I believe that rumor because I don't think those people are out working right now. But the rumor is out that 5G is going into all the public schools.
Interesting. Yeah. There's so many. There's a lot of questions, but let's talk a little bit about just where can people learn more from you if they want to find out more about what you have to say.
I'm dedicating the coming month and possibly 2 months to putting out as much information as I possibly can onto my website and onto my forum. My website's foodandsport.com. If you've never been, please come. It's got more free information on health accumulation than any site in the world. Certainly on any raw site, but on any site in the world. I mean, we're giving away a ton of information. I've got a free forum as well, which you can click on directly from the Food and Sport site. Food and Sport is 10 letters, not 12. It's FOODNSPORT. But if you go to Food and Sport, you can find me there. You can ask me questions easily. I'm still dedicated to the idea that leaders lead from the front and are easily accessible. So I remain accessible, and I'm happy to answer anybody who asks me questions. If I think you need professional guidance, I'll tell you, but it's your choice whether you want to get it or not. And, you know, if I need to refer you to somebody, I'll do that. I'm happy to. I think referring people to others is one of the best services I can provide, and builds more confidence in me. So I'm happy to do it. I know I take a different tack than most people take. I really take 100% stand on the things where I'm 100% clear. The things that I don't know about, there's a ton in the world I don't know about, but I do know the health field pretty well. And I'm happy to discuss health accumulation and health building with anybody who wants to do that.
And how do you think this will pan out? And in terms of UK Fruit Fest coming up in July, at the end of July, how do you think it'll be affected, or things will have changed by then?
I'd love to say that things will be back to normal sometime in May. that's the current trend is all pointing towards that, but we're never going to go back to normal. It won't be like it was before. Things are going to be different. And this is only because of social media, not because we had a flu this season. I mean, saying, oh, we had a winter flu season, that shouldn't really have created what happened. But it's going to be a long time till things ever calm down, and it'll never probably be the same. The distance between people, the lack of trust, the fear levels, there's a lot going on that's going to change the way society functions. Personally, I think that everything should be on. If I was running the UK Fruit Fest, I would be planning on having one heck of a season this year, with more vegans than ever and more people interested than ever. I would heavily promote the fact that there have been 0 cases of corona amongst vegans. I mean, come on, let's learn to be vegan right now. I think the festivals will do just fine. I'm still moving ahead with my own retreats that are scheduled for the months of September and October. But I have this small problem that people can't travel overseas. And right now we're not allowed to gather. But I think all those restrictions on gathering will have been revoked and dropped. There's no, you're not more likely to get sick from 10 people than you are from one person who's sick. So why more, more people don't, they're just an individual. You could gather with each of them individually and it would be legal, but you can't gather with all of them at once because that's illegal. It doesn't actually make sense the way it's set up, but glad I'm not making those rules.
Excellent. Let me try and see here. I just want to say, yeah, go and follow. Where would be the best place to follow you? Would it be your newsletter, your forum? Just maybe getting some of your books.
I'm on my forum every single day, usually a few times a day. Anybody asks me anything there, I respond. I don't do private health consulting on the forum because that's just an inappropriate place to do, things that should be private. But any generic health questions, practical health questions, I answer everything on the forum. It's been going for a long time, and that's probably the best way to reach me. But I answer all my email. I always respond to email. Anybody who has to ask me anything, they can always ask by email. I am making every effort I possibly can to increase my visibility on my site and my participation on the site itself, and hoping that this month will be a highly productive month for me.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. I'm sorry. I think we'll probably just leave it there for now. And if you want to go and ask Doug some more questions, he'll be available on his forum at foodandsport.com.
Ronnie, thank you for the time. It's a treat to be on with you. What I'd like to, if I was going to close with anything, it would be that
sure.
A, it's the flu, but B, don't fall for the hype. Not only is the hype not true, not only are the rumors not true, not only is the hype just multiplying more hype and exaggeration and scare, but it creates a chemical tsunami in your body of things that are health destroying. We really need to be focusing on building our health, not trying to be fearful or run away or telling horrible stories that aren't true in the first place. We need to be building our health. We need to be accumulating our health. This is done through healthful practices and not through special preventions. The medical model says do different things when we're sick than when we're ill, but the health model says do all the same things to regain your health that you would do in order to maintain your health. And maybe you need a little more sunlight in the spring than you need in the autumn, or maybe you need a little more social time after you've been isolated for a while. But it's all the things that build health are the same whether you're sick or you're not sick. And it's easy to accept the health model in theory when you don't need it. But now, when we're at a time where basically people are in full on panic, we never needed the health model more. This is not the time to default into the medical model and start trying to treat potential symptoms or prevent symptoms by doing special, I mean, there's more corona cures being sold on the web today than you could ever even count, and none of them are going to do it. None of them are effective in any way, but people are becoming fearful, and the fear itself is its own disease, as was said a long time ago. You got nothing to fear but fear itself. Let's maintain a voice of calm, understanding that 500 million people die every single year on planet Earth. 500 million people die every single year. So the fact that 50,000 corona deaths, I mean, that's such a small number. It's just not worth getting excited about.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for joining us today. Obviously, you're very busy when you're doing it there in Costa Rica. And highly encourage everyone to read Doug's books and look at more of his information. He's got plenty of free videos as well up on YouTube.
I want to meet you.
Yeah, and there's nothing quite like the experience of meeting Doug in person and getting your questions answered by him directly. Yeah, thank you very much, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Just a shout out to all the people that I see that are online. I'm seeing your pictures and whatnot. And,
sure.
And I'm just going to encourage you as well. I mean, I'm trying my very best, and hopefully you got that today, to be the voice of calm, be the voice of common sense, be a bit rational in your approach. Use your tried and true, trusted health regimen to continue to build your health. But I'm seeing, even as I look across and I screen through who's online, and I'm seeing a lot of leaders in the health field, and I'm honored that you're here to listen to me. Thank you very much. But go out there and be leaders yourselves and continue spreading all that fantastic message that I know you've done for so many of you that I see, for decades or for years, or whatever it is, and continue to be that voice for health.
Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
having me on board. Thanks for having me on, Ronnie.
Yeah, and have a good day where you are. And
fully intending.
Okay. Right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Doug, for joining us. And I know that everyone didn't get every single question answered. I apologize for that. Okay, give me a second. We did our best there, but Doug is available via the forum, foodandsport.com. I'll put a link there and you can check that out.